It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Welcome to episode number 593. Damn. 593 of Rico Brogna. I'm your host, Evan Roberts. We have a lot to talk about today. Clubhouse issues around the 2025 New York Mets. We will discuss Framber Valdez to the New York Mets. Any truth to it? We will discuss that as well. And we will open up the Rico Brogna mailbag. So we'll hit on a variety of topics because of you people emailing the ricob@gmail.com. You know what I find kind of funny? When the 2025 hellscape of a season finally ended, I said on the Rico and probably on the fan as well, give it a couple of days, give it a week or two, and we're going to get the expose. We're going to get the tell-all about how bad the locker room was, because it is kind of cliched in sports. We saw it after the 2023 season. When a team stinks, when a team underachieves, when a team has a massive fail, we always hear about how off the locker room was. And then when things go great, like 2024, the miracle of 2024, we hear about how copacetic the locker room was, how amazing it was. So when the season ended, and obviously 2025 is a disaster, we all know, I don't need to say it over and over again, we were waiting for that story. We were waiting for that smoking gun to tell us about how disjointed the Met locker room was, and we never got it. You know, for the most part, all we got was that the locker room was different, that it wasn't necessarily bad, but it wasn't as special as 2024 was. We finally got the story that I expected on October 10th or on October 20th. We finally got it on Black Friday, courtesy of Mike Puma. And so before I read to you some of the appealing notes of this story from Mike Puma, for those that have not heard it, I find the timing to be incredibly odd. I mean, usually it's right after the season is over. We hear about, Tommy Pham saying it's the least hardworking team he's ever seen, or this guy doesn't like that guy, and the locker room was a disaster and they didn't have leadership. You don't usually wait until Black Friday. And so naturally, when I saw the headline of this article and I went right past that paywall by paying for it, I'm a sucker. I pay for a lot of these services. Before I read a word, all I could think about was, yeah, this is probably coming from Brandon Nimmo. Fair or not, it's just the timing of it. Brandon Nimmo was traded less than a week ago, and then randomly in late November, we hear dirt about the Met locker room. Why would the random source decide to bring it up like on Thanksgiving dinner? Let me call Mike Puma and let him know some dirt about the 2025 Mets. So whenever there is a story with, unnamed sources, I always love to try to figure out who probably leaked it. And so, like most of us, I don't think I'm cutting the atom here or splitting the atom. It's likely Brandon Nimmo. Why? Who knows? I'm not a Met anymore. I'll tell all. So let me read a little bit from Mike Puma's wonderful article, in which the headline is Revealed. Francisco Lindor, Jeff McNeil battled again, and Mets shortstop's chilly rapport with Juan Soto helped doom the 2025 season. So let's get to this Lindor-McNeil stuff. Francisco Lindor and Jeff McNeil had a heated confrontation last season, just the latest friction between the teammates in what has been a turbulent Mets relationship. After a defensive lapse on June 20th in Philadelphia, an angry Lindor at some point began verbally attacking McNeil, according to a source, leading to what was described as a tense standoff between the two. The Mets lost their seventh straight game that night, an initial stretch of futility that indicated maybe something was amiss with a team that had surged to season-high 21 games above 500 just over a week earlier. A play didn't get made, and that pissed Lindor off, a source said, who was nearby the confrontation. I mean, nearby the confrontation, yeah, in left field. I mean, come on, nearby the confrontation. So I'm assuming it's not a fan in the 10th row of Citizens Bank Park. It's a source who was nearby said confrontation, on a play that happened of the seventh inning in a game that got out of hand. In fact, wait, hold on. I have my scorebook right here. Let's remind ourselves what happened on this day. June 20th, I say. All right. Believe it or not, that was a Friday night before Carlos Mendoza came to Fanatics Fest to be on the Rico. That was the game prior. So this was a weird game. The Mets were losing 2-0. They rallied to tie it in the sixth on back-to-back home runs by Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil to make it 2-2. The Phillies proceeded to score 6 runs in the bottom of the seventh inning off of Reed Garrett and Justin Garza. And the game turned into a blowout. They lost 10-2. So just a little quick recap on what happened in that game. The offense did dick. What else is new? Sorry, excuse my language. It was the LD offense, as we like to call it. And then the bullpen completely imploded after they got, all they could out of Blade Tidwell, who pitched into the fourth inning. John Boy has already put out the play in question, or what appears to be the play in question, and it was a play in the eighth inning after things had gotten out of hand, a ground ball to second base in which McNeil made not like the hardest throw to second base to try to turn a double play on Kyle Schwarber. And so it appeared Lindor may not have been happy about the angst of the flip, the velocity of the flip. Look, I think this is one of those scenarios where we were all going to have a bias. If we are rekindling Francisco Lindor versus Jeff McNeil, which is not a surprise, when one guy chokes the other guy, you have to assume it isn't going to be the sweetest relationship from on here on out. Like, it's a working relationship, and I'm sure they've been okay with each other to the point where Lindor's buying him a car or whatever he did, the delayed car purchase after he won the batting title. So the idea of Lindor and McNeil having another blow-up, that should surprise nobody. They're also Major League Baseball players. They are 20-something, 30-something-year-old men filled with testosterone. Is that the word? I have so little, so I have a tough time saying it. So naturally, these kinds of conflicts are going to happen. But where we are going to be biased is no one's going to defend Jeff McNeil. No one. Even in a game in which he hit the home run to tie it. Jeff McNeil has been on the outs with the Met fan base for 2 years. We view him as expendable, and we also just view him as a guy that every time things are going badly, mopes, bitches, complains, and throws stuff. And it's one thing when Paul O'Neill did that. Here's the difference. Paul O'Neill's really good. Paul O'Neill was the warrior. Jeff McNeil's just a guy who whines and bitches a lot. So I think I represent a lot of Met fans when I tell you that right off the top, I'm probably going to side with Francisco Lindor. And I'm going to say if Lindor had an issue with the velocity of that flip from Jeff McNeil, that's what a captain should do. So as little information as we have, based on the information we have, and based on the players, and based on the fact that we spent the last, how long talking about how Lindor is a captain, well, that's what I would want from my captain. Call that crap out. I don't care that it's 8-2 in the bottom of the eighth inning. You play to win the game. You don't give in. You don't give up. So I read that part of the story and I say, good. Good for Lindor. Bad for David Stearns because despite everything he has said at his last press conference about wanting Jeff McNeil back, logic would tell you they're not going to want Jeff McNeil back. And you never want to give other teams reasons to offer you less. But either way, if the relationship between Lindor and McNeil continues to be fractured, that this wasn't just a one-off in the middle of June in the midst of a losing streak, like it is a relationship that is back to not being great, then, who are you picking between the two guys? Like, what kind of question is that? It's an easy one. You're picking Lindor. Now let's get to the Juan Soto part. Another Clubhouse source, so I guess not Brandon Nimmo in this case, unless it was someone else and now it's Brandon Nimmo. Another Clubhouse source indicated that relations between Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto were chilly following the latter's arrival on a record $765 million contract. Quote, Soto is very businesslike, all business, no fluff, the source said. He wants to come to the yard and work his tail off and win games. He's not into fashion or any of that other stuff. Lindor is into that. It's just two different personalities. Okay. Let me read a little bit further before I opine. There are questions over who exactly was leading the team. Lindor, who has often been identified as potential captain material, seemed to lose some of that grasp on the clubhouse. Soto hardly dispelled that notion with his assertion late in the season that Starling Marte was the team's captain. And here's the quote that we made a big deal about. When this happened, we took some time here on the Rico. You know what? I'm going to phrase that. I don't think we made a big deal of it. We addressed it, though. We read this quote and said, wow, that's weird. It sounds like Soto doesn't love Lindor. So this is not a surprise. But the quote again was, Marte is literally the leader of the team. I feel like he's actually the captain of this team, Soto said. He's bringing everybody together. He's bringing the energy that we need. He's a guy who has been stepping up every single time. It doesn't matter what. He's actually the real deal of the team. He's the model of the team. Everybody, when they want to talk and get to know something or have a conversation, they can go to him. He's actually the real deal. When I read that quote, I think it was on a Friday night. We did the Rico a few days later, talked about whatever series it was, and I read it and said, isn't that peculiar? What does it mean? I don't know what it means, but it felt like Soto was going out of his way to either put down Lindor or put over Marte. And he has a long-standing relationship with Starling Marte, loves Starling Marte. We heard early in the season how Marte was the one who reminded Juan, hey, we have fun around here. You hit a home run, you got to pose for the picture. But it did feel a little pointed. With that said, that comment from a source, are you kidding me? They're different. Soto doesn't like fashion. That right there, that quote at least, because I don't know what their relationship is. I guess we could all do baseball fan fiction to try to figure it out. But the quote that I just read, not the Marte one, it was the Soto is very businesslike, all business, no fluff, the source said. He wants to come to the yard and work his tail off and win games. He's not into fashion or any of that other stuff. It's just two different personalities. You know what that is? That is a freaking nothing burger. I'm sorry. They're different. Breaking news. Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor are different. I mean, okay. Breaking news. I'm different than Tiki. Breaking news. I'm different than Carton. Breaking news. I'm different than Beningo. I work with all three of those guys. I don't got a bad word about any of them, but we're different. What the hell does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. Now, again, the first thing I said is, I don't know what their relationship is. They may hate each other. I don't know. So I acknowledge, I don't know, but what I have to acknowledge is that quote means nothing. They're different. Okay. Francisco Lindor loves fashion. Okay, right. Juan Soto is business-like. We always knew that about Juan Soto. I had heard that about his Yankee days, and this is the way it was described. And I'm pretty sure we talked about this on the Rico Brogna during the offseason, or certainly on Evan and Tiki. And that is, he never grew close to his Yankee teammates because his Yankee teammates would go out to dinner. They would go out. Some would go clubbing. Soto would go right back to the hotel and would study tape and would eat the right foods. I heard stories that I think it was like his family makes some food or his mom makes some food. Like he treats his body like a temple, which is great. And that it wasn't that he and Yankee teammates weren't friends. It was that they never were close, because I guess you become very close when you go out and you hang out and you do stuff like that. And so, not because he hates everybody, but because he's different. I almost can relate to that, because other than when I was looking to eventually find my wife, which I did, I never wanted to go out. I worked at Sirius before it was Sirius XM, and every night the guys would go out, they'd go drinking, they tried to meet people. I'd love to meet people. I mean, I wanted to. I was, a 22-year-old guy who's looking for some fun, but I hated going out. I went back, and you know what I would do? I'd prepare the show for the next day. I was crazy. Stupid. I admit. Crazy. Worked so hard and didn't want to do any of that other stuff. But I'm weird. And I guess I'm like Juan Soto, except a lot less talented and have a lot less money. So that part of the story, I will at least tell you, to my fellow Met fans, my fellow Ricoers, I don't think there's anything to that. As far as them being different, are they close? Probably not. Are they best friends? Probably not. But I don't think that's necessary. You got 26 guys in the locker room. As long as it isn't a problem, the way Lindor and McNeil have felt like problems, and I don't think the Lindor-Soto thing is anything to worry about. Hoff, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the one thing that you kind of just nailed at the end is like, hey, who cares how they differ once they're off the field? On the field, they both seem to be cutthroat. Like Juan Soto goes about it differently, Lindor goes about it differently. Isn't that what you want?
Yeah.
Who cares at the end of the day who puts in certain work a certain way? They're both extremely skilled at their job, and they both go out there and take it serious. Unlike some other people, like maybe this guy named Rendon out in LA.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I'm just saying you couldn't be stuck with someone like that.
No, you're 100% right. Like, I think what we're learning is that they probably aren't best friends, and they may never be best friends. But I've said this before. Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter weren't best friends either. And if you want to get into the fight aspect of it, Darryl Strawberry and Keith Hernandez beat the crap out of each other. I think in the case of McNeil, more so than even this story, it's just that we are all just over him. You know, he's been here for a while. He was a good Met. I don't want to besmirch him on the way out. Jeff McNeil was a solid New York Met. But as we are seeing the makeup of this roster change, as we are seeing the core change, to me, with 1 year left on his deal, it just seems reasonable for McNeil to be gone. And look, the one thing we know for sure is that they're not going to be a double play combo anymore. So this Lindor-McNeil double play combo is dead, because even if McNeil is back, he's certainly not playing second base with Marcus Semien. And you did get a vibe from Semien during that press conference that he's very businesslike, that he is very, I got a job to do. I'm a tough guy. I want everyone to do their job, and I'm going to hold people accountable. So who's the leader of the 2026 New York Mets? To some guys in that room, it may still be Lindor, but based on the way Marcus Semien was talking, he's going to be a leader too. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, that's not enough for me to have wanted to have made that trade, not to go back on Nimmo Semien. I think we all agree that what happens next will really determine our views on it. But you can absolutely tell by just listening to Marcus Semien or reading about his reputation that there's going to be a difference in that room. So what do I take out of this Mike Puma article? I take that McNeil and Lindor almost beat the crap out of each other, and what we already knew about Lindor and Soto, which is that they're different and they're not close. Wake me up when you give me a story that one guy punched the other guy in the face. But until then, I think it's just two incredibly talented players who just come from different backgrounds, and they have different interests off the field, and they're just different. And like I said, in using the comparison of myself with all the different radio partners I had, there's nothing wrong with being different. It's okay. Now, let me get to the Framber Valdez stuff. Here's one thing I hate about the offseason. It's not rumors. Rumors are a part of the offseason. They can be fun, cause us to speculate, argue with each other, debate each other. What I can't stand are the sources, are the people that we read on Twitter or Instagram, and then we run and say, oh, there you go. What's this guy's name again, Hoff? This guy who reported Framber Valdez to the Mets on a 6-year contract. What's his name?
Hector Gomez.
All right. I don't know Hector Gomez, but I remember Hector Gomez, if that makes any sense. Last year, during the offseason, Hector Gomez was coming out with some reports that were true and some that weren't. I don't know if he's credible. And every year we listen to these non-credible sources. Let me give you some advice. When Jeff freaking Passan tweets it, it's true. That's it. You can. Sorry, Morosi. Sorry, Rosenthal. Sorry, Heyman. Sorry, Martino. Those are all fine reporters, but Jeff Passan is like the Jesus of reporting this stuff. So, like, there are tiers. We could do a whole Rico on this. The tiers of the baseball reporters. Jeff Passan is at the top. I think that second tier are the guys I just mentioned. Heyman, Sherman, Morosi, Rosenthal. They're good. Like, I trust them too. But Passan's number one. Then you got the third tier where you're like, I kind of trust them. I don't know. Bob Nightingale.
No.
He would be on that.
He is not on that list. He is on like the fourth tier if there's one.
Oh, and then the fourth tier are the guys that you're just not sure of. So we can have a Framber Valdez discussion. I got no problem. We talked about him during the free agent deep dive. The idea that the Mets have signed him and we should now do a Rico talking about how Framber Valdez is a Met because Hector Gomez said they're the front runners and they're going to give him a 6-year contract for $210 million. Let's pump the brakes. Here's what I think I know about Framber Valdez. I'm going to give you kind of a prediction. I think the Mets are clearly aggressive in the free agent market when it comes to pitchers. I do. I think that they are trying to potentially sign one of these free agents. And then if the opportunity becomes available, whether it's Skubal, who's clearly number one, Joe Ryan, Sandy Alcantara, Freddie Peralta, we'll do more of these names coming up. We're going to do a deep dive into starting pitching trade options. That's going to be Sunday night live on YouTube and then in your podcast feed late Sunday night, early Monday morning. So we'll go more into detail. But I think that they're looking at those two avenues. Can we sign a starting pitcher to bolster our rotation? And can we acquire a starting pitcher at the top of our rotation? And I think depending on how they do with that, that could directly lead to Kodai Senga being traded. Even a guy like David Peterson being traded. I'm not a fan of that, but I'm just talking openly and honestly about the way this rotation could potentially look. So are they interested in Framber Valdez? Yeah. Like, Framber Valdez has been Mr. Quality Start for the last 5 years. You know, Dylan Cease just got that 7-year contract, and I think Dylan Cease has been the definition of reliability. Framber Valdez is a little bit off from that because he's missed a handful of starts, but not a lot. But what Framber has over Cease, I think, is the consistency of goodness, as I like to call it. Like, Framber Valdez doesn't have a 4 ERA season maxed in the middle of this. He doesn't. Last year was one of his worst seasons, and if you look at his FIP, and if you look at some of the closer numbers, he actually had a better year than the 3.66 ERA tells you, but he threw 192 innings, which is great. I think we'd all sign for that. His strikeouts per 9 were pretty consistent. But you look at the year before, 2.91 ERA, 28 starts. 3.45, 31 starts. 2.82, 31 starts. Amongst the leaders in innings pitched every single year. So a guy like Framber Valdez, and yeah, you got the incident from last year in which he is accused of purposely throwing at his own catcher. Not to get into the weeds on what happened, but yeah, I think it's certainly something if you're David Stearns you should ask about. Find out what kind of guy Framber Valdez is. But I would, if you could get Framber Valdez on a 3-year contract, I'm not saying you can, because when you're 32 years old and you're a 2-time All-Star and you've won a world championship and you've putting up the numbers like that, you're looking at Dylan Cease's contract and saying, I don't give a crap that I'm 2 years older. Give me that. I would not want to give him that. I don't want to give him a 6-year deal. I don't want to give him a 5-year deal. But I think a 4-year deal or under in which I'm paying him top money is something that I would look at and something that I think David Stearns will look at. Because here's my other kind of prediction, if you will. I think they will sign a starting pitcher free agent. They're going to break the rule, if you will, even though they've signed starting pitching free agents. But you know what I mean, like the top-end guy. I think David Stearns and Steve Cohen are going to try to make it high AAV, low years. And see, hey, if Framber Valdez is getting 6-year offers, but the 6-year offer is at about $27 million, and we come in on a 3-year offer with a vesting option for a 4th, but our money is like $34 million, would that be enough to get him? So I don't agree that the Mets are imminently going to sign him to a 6-year deal, But I bet you the Mets are talking to him just like they're talking to every other starting pitcher that's available. And I think they're going to try to get these guys on 3-year deals. Maybe with that vesting option I talked about for a 4th year. So am I interested in Framber Valdez? Sure. Do I like the idea of giving him a long-term deal? No, it would scare the crap out of me. I think you should be scared about giving a long-term deal to any starting pitcher, but I think that there are certain starting pitchers in which you're more willing to take the risk on. I said this when we did our free agent dive. It may not be the fairest thing in the world, but I think a part of my fear with Framber is that he's 5'11", 240. So you just look at him. He's not big. I mean, he's big, but he's not big. Sorry for my visual audience. When I said not big, I was referring to height. And when I said big, I was referring to girth. Not that there's wrong with anything being girthy. In fact, we've seen plenty of pitchers who are great being girthy. Hello, David Wells. So, no, I don't think the Mets are imminently going to sign him to a 6-year contract. Let's get to that mailbag, baby. I apologize. We had a lot to talk about. This Framber Valdez BSing rumor and the Met locker room. But now let's get to your thoughts. You ready? The RicoB@gmail.com. This is from Joe. Joe writes, hey, guys, I'm a Brandon Nimmo fan. He's a good player, always gives 100%, and he had his share of big moments. But if he thinks his number was headed for a spot in the Citi Field rafters, he must be smoking something. While I recognize his contributions, he's one of the guys I feel needed to go. Jeff McNeil is another. Sign Pete and Diaz. Let it be a given that right field and first base would be defensively weak spots. Sure up left field, center field, and second base, recognizing we will most likely be settling for Beatty or Vientos or Mauricio at third. Shortstop and catcher are fine. So I saw the Nimmo trade as move one in a plan. I think that's necessary, and it didn't bother me. The proof will be in whether left field and center field are taken care of. And, of course, if we get some reliable starting pitching. Let the genius get back to work. Happy holidays, guys. Thank you, Joe. I think that the bar on retired numbers has really changed. I don't mean to be a jerk here, but I was always a proponent of not retiring numbers unless the guy gets into the Hall of Fame. David Wright would have been my one exception. He was the Don Mattingly, if you will, the guy that was a career Met. When they retired Jerry Kuzman's number, and I don't mean any offense to Jerry when I say this, but when they retired Jerry Kuzman's number, all bets were off. So while I tentatively agree with our emailer about retiring Nimmo's number, what's he smoking? If he had played his entire career with the Mets and ended up near the top or at the top in a lot of stat categories, there's a really good chance that in 2045, his number would have been retired. I think now there's no way. You don't have to worry about that. Matty Box writes, Evan and Pete, I just had an epiphany. I think David Stearns is actually cooking. I think he's looking for a Lindor trade to the Tigers for Tarek Skubal. Now, you may be saying there's no way Lindor would go to the Tigers and waive his no-trade clause, but guess who plays for the Detroit Tigers? His old buddy, Mr. Thumbs Down himself, Javi Baez. It makes all the sense in the world. That article by Puma was put out there to get the fans to be okay with Lindor being traded. Also, it clears up money for Diaz and Pete and maybe even Cody Bellinger. Also, Francisco Lindor got that contract from Jared Porter and not David Stearns. Stearns may not like Lindor. What do you think? Well, there's a lot that you said there, Matt. Number one, I don't think the Tigers are trading Tarek Skubal for Francisco Lindor. I'll start with that. I don't think that they would want to bring in a shortstop who's 32 years old on a 6-year contract because that's how many years are remaining, paying the guy like $180 million. And I don't think they would bring him in at the expense of a 2-time Cy Young Award winner in the prime of his career. So I don't think the trade makes any sense, number one. Number two, when you have the kind of year that the Mets just had, the disappointment that they just had, I think your ears and eyes need to be open on everything. So while I have certainly, and I think most of you have grown a bond with Francisco Lindor over the last couple of years, I think when you have the year that you just have, I'd listen on everybody. I think the only guys I wouldn't listen on are Juan Soto And emotionally, probably Nolan McLean because of my fear that he could be Tom Seaver. And that may sound completely irrational. That's fine. I think I'm okay to have one irrational take every once in a while here on the Rico or on the Fan. But yeah, I would kind of wrap my arms around McLean and say, I just can't do it. And if I live to regret it, I live to regret it. You know what I mean? I'll deal with it. But I'm not actively looking to trade Lindor. I wouldn't want to trade Lindor, but I'd listen on anything. I don't think there would ever be a connection that would make me say yes. I think that's the other problem. And I kind of had that same theory with Nimmo, but clearly the Mets viewed Nimmo as a negative contract. Despite Lindor being signed for 6 more years, it's not a negative contract. He's still in the prime of his career. He almost won the MVP 2 years ago. I don't view that as a negative. And if teams around baseball view it as a negative, then clearly there would never be a deal to be made. But what I would ask anybody who's like myself, just open-minded to I'd listen on Lindor, I'd listen on anybody, what would it take to say yes? Isn't that kind of the complicated part? It's easy for me to say I'd listen. Okay, I'm listening. Now what? What would I have to be offered for me to be moved enough to say I'm going to trade Francisco Lindor? And I don't think that's out there, personally. This is from Nicholas. Nicholas writes, Evan and Pete, hope you guys have enjoyed your Thanksgiving. Thank you. We have. I just got done listening to your Cinco de Fivo segment on the worst free agent signings in Mets history. Before we continue, I will provide context. This will be a Met discussion, obviously, but Sean Morash on Evan and Tiki did a Cinco de Fivo, not on Met free agent signings, but on the 5 moves Brian Cashman has made in recent history that annoyed him in the moment. Because he, as a Yankee fan, was annoyed about making the qualifying offer to Trent Grisham and all that. So it then led to a discussion where me and Tommy Lugauer were debating the worst free agent signings in New York Mets history. So with that context provided, and I think that segment is on YouTube as well. So if you're done with the Rico and you want to hear it, Tommy and I had a nice discussion on that. But here's the rest of the email from Nicholas. I was glad to hear you at least admit that Max Scherzer had good moments with the Mets. I'll take it a step further and say I'm still very happy he was a Met and just wish it could have ended better. Yes, it absolutely sucks that he failed in the big moments, no doubt. But I think that Tom Glavine comparison makes a lot of sense because as someone who was too young at the time in 2007 to remember his full season, I will always dislike him because of his implosion the last game of the season against the Marlins. But since I do remember Scherzer's entire Mets tenure, I remember all his great performances during the 22 regular season where he pitched to a 2.29 ERA, and he was the undisputed leader of the team and the most respected guy in the locker room, something which you have said the Mets severely lacked in 2025. He brought a veteran clubhouse presence and legitimized the Mets as an attractive free agent destination. Remember that when he was signed, it was Steve Cohen's first full offseason as the new owner. So I think his signing helped usher in the new age Steve Cohen Mets as a force to be reckoned with. Though the results since then have fallen far short of the expectations, I do think Scherzer's presence and energy helped propel the 22 team to a 101-win season when, let's be honest, the core wasn't that elite, which you can see the Mets haven't come anywhere close to that amount of regular season wins in the years since. Yes, obviously, Scherzer imploded down the stretch, especially in the wild card game against the Padres, but people also cite that last Atlanta series where, yes, Max had a bad game. I think people forget that the offense scored 2, 3, and 2 runs respectively over those 3 games. They weren't going to win any games that series against the elite 2022 Braves lineup with that kind of inconsistency. And don't forget that in the 2 losses against the Padres in the wild card, the Mets scored 1 and 0 runs in those games. So yeah, I think Max gets way too much blame for the end-of-year stretch with not nearly enough blame going to the offensive woes. In addition, I think his whole exit with the team was blown out of proportion. It's not like he was going out demanding a trade. The Mets front office was instead trying to pressure him into accepting a trade by telling him that 2024 was going to be a rebuilding year where they truly weren't expecting to stay competitive. At his age, I can't blame him for all accepting a trade. From his perspective, all he wants to do is be on a winning team. And I was honestly never a big Scherzer fan before we signed him. So it's not like I'm inherently biased for him. I just think the flack he caught from the Met fans was too much. So yeah, Met fans, feel free to wear your Scherzer jerseys at Citi Field. He was a good Met. That's from Nick. I never proclaimed Scherzer to be the worst free agent signing. That was Tommy's opinion. I thought that was hyperbolic. I thought that Jason Bay, Jed Lowry, clearly over Scherzer. Tommy was arguing because of the expectations that Max had, it was the worst free agent signing in Met history. Obviously, I disagree with Tommy. You could check out that little debate on YouTube if you want. But, Nick, I think you're leaving something out that's really significant. You mentioned the wild card game, which was a disaster, a non-competitive mess in Game 1 against San Diego in 2022. You mentioned it wasn't that bad against Atlanta, the final weekend of the year in 2022. Okay. He also had a great year that year, even though he missed time due to injury. Obviously, turned out to not be a big deal. Mets won 101 games. The problem I have with Max was 2023. Because in that season, when they got off to a bad start, it felt like every time there was momentum building, whether it was against the Yankees at Citi Field or the Fenway Park game against the Red Sox, Max Scherzer would just crap the bed. And so by the time it ended, and really that start at Fenway is where it was like, F this guy. What really made Scherzer's reputation as this negative in a big moment started with the wild card game, or started in Atlanta, but really was elevated by the wild card series. But I thought was brought to another level by 2023. So I don't think he's the worst free agent signing in Met history, but I think he was a massive disappointment despite what the numbers say. And Tom Glavine is very similar because Tom Glavine, when you look at the contract and you look at the starts that he made every 5 days, that guy was reliable. And it's not even that first start he made against the Cubs, that non-competitive 30-degree day at Shea Stadium. It wasn't even game 162. That's what most people bring up. You know what pisses me off about Tom Glavine? Game 5 against the Cardinals in 2006. The series is tied 2-2. If the Mets win that swing game and they take it back to Shea up 3-2, it never gets to a game 7. And Glavine blew a lead. They gave him a lead. I think it was the third or fourth inning, gave it away immediately. So what I remember about Tommy, and very similar to Scherzer, is that they just disappeared in the biggest of moments. Danny writes, I know it's time to move on, and we've done a lot of Brandon Nimmo, but with the Mets recently announcing Lee Mazzilli as an inductee to their next Hall of Fame class, comparatively speaking, Brandon Nimmo had a better Mets career. Do you foresee Brandon being inducted into the Mets Hall of Fame in, say, 20 years? Nimmo, his head is ahead of Lee in almost every category except stolen bases. That's from Danny. I love Met history. I love that they appreciate Met history. The Met Hall of Fame is not the Hall of Fame. It's just not. And so if you look closely at who's in the Mets Hall of Fame, I don't even know what the criteria should be. So just based on the guys that are there, I think, yes, Brandon Nimmo will be a Met Hall of Famer. I don't think there's any doubt. He'll get a day. He's not going to get a jersey retirement day, but worse Mets have gotten days or Hall of Fame inductions besides Brandon Nimmo. So, yes, I do think many years from now, he will get that. Matt writes, guys, I think we need to start thinking about the Mets offseason as if Carson Bench is a lock to be the opening day left fielder. Stearns referred to Bench by name directly at both the GM meetings and in the Nimmo press conference. He generally refers to prospects as young players in the system and doesn't call them out. He also does this thing where he says something about Bench, then awkwardly adds in Jet or another player's name right after. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but isn't that the idea? I think this sets the Mets up for Luis Robert Jr. or Harrison Bader, right-handed hitters to complement Bench and provide good defense. This leaves the lineup light, putting up more emphasis on retaining Pete, but does improve run prevention. Love the pod, Matt. P.S. I've got a sneaking suspicion Jeff McNeil is going to be on the roster come April after reading too deeply into Stearns' comments. I don't. I think there's a chance McNeil's on the roster. I think it's a small chance. I think my new percentage of Jeff McNeil being a Met opening day 2026 is like 15%. I'm not going to put it at 0, but I think it's likely he's gone. The Benj left field thing, yeah, because reading about Carson Benj and his defense and how he projects at the major league level is that he's got the arm to play a corner outfield spot. I think what's going to determine what position he plays is who's on this team. Who do they sign? Who do they acquire? What player are we talking about? You know, if they sign Cody Bellinger, I think Cody Bellinger is the center fielder, assuming Pete is back. I want to make that clear because obviously Bellinger could be signed as an Alonso replacement and play a lot of first base. But if Bellinger is playing the outfield and is on the Mets, I think he plays a lot of center, benches, and left. I think Luis Robert Jr. is 1,000% a guy to keep an eye on. The Mets talked to the White Sox about Robert Jr. in July. Why would they not talk about him now? I have concerns about Robert Jr. I think we all should, considering it's 2 bad years in a row. But yeah, I think who they acquire is going to determine which spot Benj plays. But you're right. I think the Mets are looking at Benj where if he has a decent spring training, he makes the team. No question about it. I think with a decent spring training, he's there. Mike writes, respectfully, of course. Go ahead, Hoff. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I just want to throw in one thing about the McNeil stuff with David Stern speaking. I understand he specifically mentioned McNeil could play outfield and, throwing people off. But I think he threw things off because that is just a different way of selling your player, right? Like Jeff McNeil, we all know, or we all think that he's being shopped around. If he includes in a press conference where they think that they're going to plan on playing him, even though other GMs could read through that nonsense, the fact is you put it out there rather than being like, there's no role for him. No, we plan on playing him left field. That's another place you can play him and kind of put it out there in the universe.
Brian Cashman, and I respect Brian for this, is the only GM I've ever heard openly and honestly come out and say, yeah, we're going to trade that guy. And he did that about Sonny Gray years ago. So you're right. You're not going to say that, so you have to sell the player on why he's still valuable to you so that teams don't think you're trying to give the player away. So I do think he's going to be gone. Here's another email about Jeff McNeil. Baseball Mike writes, respectfully, of course, but I'm trying to figure out why you hate Jeff McNeil so much. I originally had a different email typed out, but I decided to make it a bit classier. What does that mean, Baseball Mike? Does that mean the email was starting off with, like, you're a douche? Did Jeff McNeil screw a girlfriend? Like, what? I'd like to know what the unclassy email looked like, but let me get to the rest of your point because I do want to answer it. I don't understand why you hate Jeff McNeil. This is a player that can play 3 positions, second base, left field, right field well, fill in a couple of more without hurting you, center field, first base, and probably play a couple of others in an emergency, third base and shortstop, without looking like a disaster. You are talking about a utility player on a fairly inexpensive 1-year deal. I would think that that would be the type of player that Mr. There is no such thing as a bad 1-year deal would want to add to a roster. He's been nothing but a grinder, playing through injury and hustling out every single ground ball for 8 years. Because he throws the occasional hissy fit, we need to toss him out there? I don't understand the fan base disdain of El Jefe. He's my favorite Met of all time, and I no longer will stand for disrespect of his name. I don't hate Jeff McNeil. I swear to you I don't. I think that if you go into the archives of the Rico, you will hear a lot of the arguments you just made. I made to Hoff about his value, about a guy that can play second base, left field, and right field at a decent level. I have appreciated Jeff McNeil's time here. Last year, when I suggested and wanted the Mets to trade him, it wasn't because he sucks. It wasn't because I hate him. It wasn't because I thought he was worthless. It was because I wanted to create an opportunity for some of the younger players. One thing David Stern says that I do agree with is I like trying to win. I like adding veterans, but I like having kind of a spot or two open for a young player to potentially take it. And so to me, McNeil being sent away and let's say Iglesias being re-signed, knowing Iglesias is what he is, he's just a utility player, he's 35, so he's a backup, but would have allowed opportunities for Mauricio, Jet Williams if he made it, Luis Angel Acuna. Don't have to agree with me, but I at least want to walk you through why I wanted to trade him a year ago. And obviously I wanted something back. If there was nothing out there, then I get it. They didn't trade him. Okay. This year, we are talking about really changing things. 2025 was a disaster. A part of why I want to trade him, as you do point out, is there's no such thing as a bad one-year deal, is I think he has value. And if I can use him to get something of value, whether it's a solid relief arm or a back of the rotation arm, or now, considering the spot the Mets are in, an outfielder, or even a good to decent prospect, why wouldn't I? I think he's expendable. I think especially now with the acquisition of Marcus Semien, he isn't even going to play his most natural position. So I get it. I understand when you hear me or others talk so much about trade this guy, I'm going to trade that guy. You just assume that we all hate them. I don't hate him. I am merely telling you I would move on from him in a respectful way. Oh, boy. But thank you. I still want to know what the heck that original email would have sounded like if he wasn't so respectful. You know what I mean?
This is the same thing that people say when I hate Brandon Nimmo. Again, it's nothing personal. It just there's certain aspects of his game that I think that were, the Mets could improve upon. That's what it comes down to. I mean, at some point in time, as these players start to age out a little bit, don't you want upgrades? And if you could do it, so be it. I mean, listen, it's not a hate thing by any means, but when you look at a season, like you said, in 2025, which was so bad, you can't bring it all back. You can't. You just can't do it.
Ronnie writes, and this is one of those live action Rico emails responding to some of the things we're talking about on this edition of the Rico Brogna. Ronnie writes, hey, Evan, watching right now, I'm with you on Hector Gomez, but it is interesting that his brother is Gilbert Gomez, our new first base coach. I wonder if there's any tie there. Maybe. I mean, I don't think Hector Gomez is making stuff up necessarily. My point is he's not reliable. He's not Jeff Passan or John Heyman. So I think that the Mets talking to Framber Valdez is likely. I was going to say realistic. I'd go further. I'd say it's likely. I just don't think that they're anywhere close to a 6-year contract. That would be my opinion on that. Let's go to Eli. Eli writes, hey, Evan, Hoff, love the show. Do you think you can do an episode examining every single trade David Stearns has made since joining the Mets? It appears to me that he's lost every single trade other than Luis Torrens for cash trade. I think I read this email a couple of days ago, and I did agree that we're going to do it. So I'm working on it. We're going to get there probably sometime in January or February, but we will have a David Stearns deep dive. And finally, this is from Ferris. Ferris writes, longtime tortured Met fan here, writing in to officially admit something I did not expect to say. The Brandon Nimmo trade makes sense. Huh. Okay. When the news first dropped, I was ready to light my phone on fire, scream into the void, and demand a wellness check on David Stearns. You don't just trade Brandon Nimmo, our smiley, hustling, wall-crashing chaos merchant, without sending every Mets fan into an existential crisis. But after 2 days of walking it off, replaying the last 5 Septembers in my head and remembering how many times this same core has melted down, I get it. We can't just keep running back the same roster. Look, I have never, in the week that this trade went down, I've never hated the trade because I needed Brandon Nimmo to be a lifelong Met. I've hated it because baseball-wise, I was concerned about taking an outfielder who's still productive, still good, who I think I can kind of helped by DHing half the time and actually keeping his defense at a higher level. I didn't love trading it for a 35-year-old second baseman that feels on the decline. But like I always do, and I think we all do as sports fans, you may not like something, but after a few days, you start to think about it. And you start to say, okay, I don't love it. I see it. It makes sense. And I hope I'm wrong. And then you try to convince yourself on why it's going to work. But really, it's all about the next move. The next move will help determine it. Let me get a few more in there. I said the last email. I can't do it. People write so many freaking emails. I feel like I got to get to as many as I can.
Can I just add one quick thing onto this? And this is not supposed to be insulting to anybody, Brandon Nimmo or anything like that, but let's look at what Chaim Bloom did with Boston when he first got in there. First thing he did was he traded Mookie Betts to the Dodgers, and he, in his world, got a haul back. It turned into Verdugos of the world and really nothing, and it backfired. But Mookie Betts is like an MVP caliber player. So, like, yes, Brandon Nimmo is a fan favorite. That hurts. But he was never an MVP caliber player.
No.
So you got to remember what we're dealing with here. It's not, this trade is not going to get David Stearns fired. Let's put it that way.
No, I don't think so. I think what happens next May. Well, really, what would get him fired is losing a lot for a couple of years. That's what would get him fired. Alex writes, Evan, you've said multiple times on this podcast over the past few months, trust me, there will never be a salary cap in baseball. Is that purely your opinion? Is that an educated opinion based on sources? What gives you the confidence to say that? I'm not challenging you. I certainly hope you're correct, but I was just curious what's behind that statement. Alex, what's behind that statement is not how I know things are going to go, because none of us do. There's going to be a labor war in a year, and how that ends, who knows, in terms of how much time we miss and what the next CBA will look like. The reason I have confidence that that next CBA will not have a salary cap is it would take breaking the union, shattering the union to get an MLB salary cap. And while this union is not nearly as strong as the Donald Fear-led union of 1994, they canceled a World Series over it. People forget this part. Well, I wouldn't say people forget this part, but I should explain it to our younger audience. They didn't just cancel the World Series. Then it continued into March and had replacement players playing spring training games. We were like 72 hours away from a replacement player opening day between the Mets and the Marlins. And the only reason that things got settled was because a court got involved. A future Supreme Court justice, might I say. So I'm looking at history. I'm looking at the rhetoric that I've heard from the players. They're not going for a salary cap. And if I'm wrong and there is a salary cap, I don't care that I'm wrong. I care that we will have probably missed baseball for years. That's what I'll care about. Like, I think it really, and that may sound hyperbolic, I really believe that, they would have to shut the sport down for a year. Remember the NHL season that we lost? There was no hockey season 1 year. I think that's what we're looking at. So when I say that confidently, there won't be a salary cap, it's because I just don't think the players will ever give in on that. Could there be more restrictive penalties in terms of going over the luxury tax? Absolutely. Wouldn't rule that out. But I don't think we're going to ever get a salary cap. And for that reason, we're never going to get a salary floor, which I am disappointed about. I'd love a salary floor. I think it is more disgraceful what the little team does than what the big team does. What the Dodgers do, no problem. What we do, no problem. Yankees, Phillies, Blue Jays, all the big market teams. That is so less egregious than the Marlins and the Pirates and the A's pocketing money the way they do. So I'd love if there was a salary floor, but the reason I don't think we're ever going to get a salary floor is because the players won't want it, because they're going to think that leads to a salary cap. That if they ever agree to a salary floor, it gets you to the salary cap, and they're never going to agree to that. So that's why I am so confident we will never see a salary cap. Keep the emails coming. As I always say, we try to do a mailbag at least once a week, the ricob@gmail.com. Plus, we'll mix in some of your emails during our future podcasts, including our next one barring breaking news. Of course, breaking news can always change the schedule and change the topics of our next podcast. But the next Rico Brogna, which we will schedule post for you sometime late Sunday night, early Monday morning, wherever you download your podcast, will be a deep dive into the starting pitching trade market. We've done it on starting pitching free agents. Now we're going to look at the trade market, some of the top-end guys that we are familiar with, some of the other guys that maybe you're not even thinking about, and then what the packages would have to look like to get the players in question and if it's worth it. So we'll do all that coming up on the next Rico Brogna. Of course, you could always comment, disagree, give ideas by emailing us, thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. Hopefully everybody's having a nice, healthy, happy Thanksgiving weekend. From all of us at Rico Brogna to you, we'll catch you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.